The shocking reign of Frantz Schmidt. Medieval history's bloodiest executioner, Frantz Schmidt, was born into a life that was already decided for him. He did not choose it, and he could not escape it. From the moment he came into the world in the mid-1500s, his future followed a path laid down by his father and the laws of his time. In the towns of the Holy Roman Empire, work often passed from parent to child, but few jobs carried the heavy burden that Frantz inherited. His father was a man who carried out the law's harshest duties, and because of that, the family lived on the edge of society, close enough to serve it but never close enough to belong. As a child, Frantz quickly learned that his family was different. Other children played freely in the streets, laughed together, and visited one another's homes. Frantz was often kept at a distance. Parents whispered when he passed. Doors closed softly when he came near. He did not fully understand why at first, but he could feel it. There was an invisible wall between him and the rest of the town. His family lived outside the main social circle, not by choice, but by tradition and fear. His father was not a cruel man at home. In fact, he was careful, serious, and deeply religious. He believed that his work, though disliked, was necessary for order. He taught Frantz that the law existed to protect people, and that someone had to carry out its decisions. Still, this lesson did not make life easier for the boy. Frantz watched his father prepare for duties that made others turn away in discomfort. He saw how the same people who depended on his father's work refused to greet him in the market. Education was one of the few escapes Frantz had. His father insisted that he learn to read and write, which was not common for all children at the time. Frantz studied carefully, learning numbers, letters, and religious texts. Books became a quiet place where he could forget how the world treated him. Writing especially felt safe. On paper, he could speak without fear of judgment. This habit would later become an important part of his life, though he did not know it yet. Even with education, Frantz could not avoid the truth that followed him. His last name alone marked him. Teachers treated him politely but kept their distance. Religious gatherings were uncomfortable, filled with sideways glances and silence. He learned early how to lower his eyes, how to stand quietly, how not to react when others spoke behind his back. These lessons shaped him into a calm and controlled person, someone who showed little emotion on the outside. As Frantz grew older, his father began to train him in the skills of the profession. This training was not rushed. It was slow, careful, and strict. His father believed mistakes could not be made, not because of fear, but because the law demanded order and accuracy. Frantz was taught discipline above all else. Every movement mattered. Every step had to be done with respect for the rules. Still, the training weighed heavily on him. He understood that this path would never bring admiration or friendship. It would never allow him to live like other men. Marriage would be difficult. His children, if he had any, would face the same isolation. These thoughts troubled him deeply, but there were few alternatives. In those times, changing one's social role was nearly impossible. Despite his doubts, Frantz showed a natural focus and patience. He listened closely, practiced carefully, and asked thoughtful questions. His father noticed this and felt both pride and sadness. Pride because his son was capable, and sadness because he knew this life would never be kind to him. Yet in their world, duty mattered more than comfort. Religion played a strong role in Frantz's upbringing. His family prayed often, asking for forgiveness and guidance. Frantz was taught to believe that his work, though heavy, served a higher order. This belief helped him cope, but it did not remove his inner struggle. He often wondered why some people were born into honor while others inherited shame. As a young man, Frantz became more aware of how deeply society judged his family. He could not join guilds or social groups. He was not welcome at celebrations. Even business dealings were tense. People needed his family's services, yet they avoided personal contact. This contradiction shaped his view of human nature. He learned that fear often hides behind strict rules and moral language. What set Frantz apart from others in his profession was his quiet nature. He did not boast. He did not drink excessively or seek attention. He kept records, studied laws, and tried to understand the system he served. He wanted to believe that fairness still mattered, even in a world that treated him unfairly. His decision to continue in his inherited role was not made in a single moment. It formed slowly, shaped by pressure, responsibility, and limited choice. He accepted that resisting would bring hardship not only to himself, but also to his family. In choosing duty, he hoped to bring some order and dignity to a role most people despised. By the time Frantz reached adulthood, he was fully prepared to step into his official position. He carried with him years of training, emotional restraint, and quiet reflection. He also carried a deep understanding of isolation. He knew he would never be celebrated, but he believed he could still act with care and discipline. This early stage of Frantz Schmidt's life was not filled with dramatic moments or loud conflict. Instead, it was shaped by silence, routine, and inner struggle. It was the story of a boy who learned too early that society could decide a person's worth before they ever spoke a word. It was the beginning of a life defined not by choice, but by duty, patience, and the hope that one day, honor could be separated from fear. And as Frantz stepped fully into his adult role, he did not yet know that his quiet habit of writing, his strict discipline, and his thoughtful nature would one day make his story known far beyond his own lifetime. When Frantz Schmidt officially stepped into his public role, his life changed in ways he had expected, but still found difficult to carry. The title itself placed him in a position of authority, yet it also locked him into isolation. The town needed him, depended on him, and feared him at the same time. From his first days in service, Frantz understood that he was no longer just a man with a family history. He was now a visible symbol of the law's final decision. His early duties were watched closely. Town leaders, court officials, and older members of the community paid attention to how he behaved, how he followed instructions, and how he handled pressure. Any mistake could damage his reputation forever. Frantz approached this responsibility with extreme care. He spoke little, listened closely, and followed the law exactly as written. He believed that if he acted with order and calm, he could at least bring seriousness to a role most people only viewed with fear. Unlike others before him, Frantz did not treat his work casually. He prepared carefully for each task, reviewing court decisions and understanding the reason behind each sentence. This did not make the outcomes easier, but it gave him a sense of structure. In his mind, chaos was worse than firmness. He believed that if the law was to be carried out, it should be done without anger or cruelty, only with discipline. One of the most unusual habits Frantz developed was writing everything down. After each official duty, he returned home and recorded the date, the ruling, and the outcome in clear, simple language. He did not write to shock or impress anyone. He wrote to remember, to keep order in his own thoughts, and perhaps to make sense of a life that felt unreal at times. Writing gave him distance. On the page, he could be an observer instead of a participant. As months turned into years, Frantz's reputation grew. People began to see him as dependable. Court officials trusted him to follow instructions without question. Town leaders believed he would not abuse his authority. Even those who feared him admitted quietly that he was precise and controlled. Still, respect did not bring acceptance. He was spoken to when needed and ignored when not. Public spaces remained uncomfortable for him. At markets, conversations stopped when he passed. At religious gatherings, people avoided sitting near him. Frantz noticed everything, but he reacted to nothing. He had learned long ago that responding would only deepen the divide. Silence became his shield. Despite the emotional distance, Frantz did not harden into bitterness. He remained deeply thoughtful. Before each duty, he prayed privately, asking for strength and clarity. He believed that every person deserved dignity, even when facing the law's punishment. This belief guided his actions and helped him sleep at night, though sleep was not always easy. With experience came emotional weight. Each decision carried a story behind it, and Frantz was fully aware of that. He saw families watching from a distance. He noticed how crowds reacted, how fear and curiosity mixed together. He felt the tension in the air, even when no one spoke. Over time, these moments stayed with him, returning in quiet hours when the town was asleep. Still, Frantz did not allow emotion to interfere with his duties. He believed that losing control would dishonor both the law and himself. This balance between feeling and restraint defined him. He did not pretend that his work was light, but he refused to let it consume him entirely. As his career continued, Frantz's written records grew longer. They became more than notes. They reflected patterns, changes in laws, and shifts in society. Through his writing, he noticed how justice was applied differently depending on class, wealth, and influence. These observations did not make him rebellious, but they made him aware. He began to understand that the law was not always equal, even when it claimed to be. This awareness added another layer to his inner conflict. Frantz knew he could not change the system, yet he was part of it. He chose to respond by being as fair and controlled as possible within his role. He followed rules strictly so no one could accuse him of personal bias or wrongdoing. At home, Frantz lived quietly. He avoided unnecessary attention and kept his personal life simple. He spent time reading, writing, and reflecting. He did not seek friendships easily, knowing that most people were uncomfortable around him. When he did speak with others, his tone was polite and distant. He had learned that closeness often led to disappointment. As years passed, younger officials began to see him as a permanent figure in town life. Children grew up knowing his name without knowing him as a person. To them, he was part of the town structure, like the courthouse or the city walls. Frantz noticed this and felt a strange sense of fading. He was present everywhere and nowhere at the same time. Yet there was one area where he found purpose beyond duty: teaching. When assistants or apprentices were assigned to him, Frantz insisted on discipline and respect. He taught them that their role was not about power but responsibility. He warned them that the work would follow them forever, shaping how others saw them and how they saw themselves. Through teaching, Frantz tried to pass on the values he held onto: control, seriousness, and restraint. He did not want others to treat the role lightly. In this way, he felt he was protecting the dignity of the law, even if the world refused to respect those who served it. By the middle of his career, Frantz Schmidt was known far beyond his town. Officials from other regions had heard of his careful approach and reliable conduct. Some even consulted his records to understand how cases had been handled over time. Without intending to, Frantz had created one of the most detailed personal records of his profession. Yet recognition brought no comfort. Frantz remained socially isolated, his family marked by the same invisible line that had followed him since childhood. He worried constantly about the future, about whether his children would be forced into the same role, about whether his service would ever be seen as honorable rather than shameful. These worries did not weaken his commitment, but they deepened his determination to act with integrity. If he could not change how society viewed him, he could at least leave behind proof that he had served with discipline and conscience. Part 2 of Frantz Schmidt's life was defined by routine, responsibility, and reflection. It was not dramatic in the way stories often are. Instead, it was a slow build of trust, pressure, and inner struggle. He became known not as a man of cruelty, but as a man of order in a world that relied on harsh rules to maintain control. As time moved forward, Frantz stood firmly in his role, carrying both the authority of the law and the quiet weight of isolation. He did not yet know how long this path would last, But he understood one thing clearly. Every step he took was being recorded, not just in his diary, but in the memory of history itself. As the years passed, the weight of Frantz Schmidt's responsibilities began to settle deeper into his mind and heart. By this stage of his life, he was no longer new to his role, nor was he still proving himself. He had become a fixed part of the system, someone people expected to be there, steady and unchanging. Yet inside, his thoughts were far from still. Experience brought understanding, and understanding brought questions that never fully left him. Each duty now felt heavier than before, not because he doubted his ability, but because he understood more clearly what each decision meant. In his early years, he focused on learning procedures and following rules. Now, he saw patterns. He noticed how fear shaped behavior, how desperation pushed people into mistakes, and how circumstances often mattered as much as choices. These observations stayed with him long after the crowds had gone home. Frantz remained calm in public, but in private moments, his mind was always active. He often replayed events in his thoughts, not to judge others but to understand them. He wondered how different lives might have been if people had received help earlier, guidance instead of punishment. These thoughts did not make him defiant, but they made him human. He felt the distance between what the law demanded and what compassion wished for. Writing continued to be his greatest release. His diary became more detailed, not just listing events but reflecting his state of mind. He wrote about the weather, the mood of the crowd, and the silence before important moments. These details mattered to him because they reminded him that each day was real, not just another duty completed. The act of writing helped him keep his sense of self in a role that often tried to erase it. Despite his inner reflections, Frantz never allowed personal feelings to influence his public conduct. He believed strongly that mixing emotion with authority could lead to unfairness. This belief required constant discipline. There were moments when his heart felt heavy, when sleep came slowly, and when memories returned without warning. Still, every morning he rose and prepared himself with the same quiet determination. The people of the town continued to treat him with cautious distance. They trusted his reliability but avoided his presence. Over time, this behavior no longer surprised him. What did affect him more deeply was how quickly people forgot the human side of those who served the system. To many, Frantz was not a man with thoughts and faith, but a function. This realization strengthened his desire to leave behind written proof of his humanity. Frantz also noticed changes in the world around him. Laws shifted, leadership changed, and social tensions rose and fell. Through it all, his role remained constant. He saw how decisions made by distant authorities affected ordinary lives. He could not speak openly about these matters, but he recorded them carefully. His diary slowly became a mirror of the time he lived in. Faith remained central to his life. Frantz believed that his actions would one day be judged not by people, but by a higher standard. This belief guided him when doubt grew too strong. He prayed not for escape, but for strength to remain fair and steady. Faith did not remove his questions, but it gave him the courage to live with them. As he grew older, Frantz became more aware of his own limits. The physical demands of his work required focus and care. He prepared himself carefully, knowing that age brought fatigue. This awareness did not weaken him. Instead, it made him more attentive. He planned every detail, ensuring that nothing was rushed or careless. Younger assistants looked to him for guidance. They saw his calm nature and followed his example. Frantz took this responsibility seriously. He spoke to them about patience, self-control, and the importance of respecting the law without taking pride in authority. He warned them that once this path was chosen, it shaped everything: how people looked at you, how you lived, and how you thought. Teaching others brought Frantz a quiet sense of purpose. In guiding them, he felt he was protecting the profession from becoming careless or cruel. He believed that even difficult roles deserved dignity and restraint. This belief became one of his strongest principles. At home, his family life remained modest and careful. Frantz worried deeply about the future of his children. He did not want them to inherit the same burden he had carried since birth. This concern slowly grew into determination. He began thinking not just about his own service, but about what legacy he would leave behind. The longer Frantz served, the more he realized that his greatest struggle was not with the work itself, but with how society viewed it. He had followed the law faithfully, yet respect remained out of reach. This injustice troubled him deeply. He believed that a person's worth should be measured by integrity, not by fear or tradition. This belief quietly changed his goal. Where once he had focused only on duty, he now began to think about recognition, not for praise but for fairness. He wanted his service to be seen as lawful and honorable, so his family could live freely. This hope did not come from pride but from love and responsibility. Though these thoughts stayed mostly private, they influenced his actions. Frantz became even more careful, even more precise. He wanted his record to speak for him when he no longer could. Every entry in his diary, every action taken with discipline, was part of that effort. Emotionally, this period of his life was the most complex. He carried years of memory, responsibility, and reflection. Yet outwardly, he remained the same calm figure. People saw consistency, not conflict. They did not hear the questions he asked himself late at night or the prayers he whispered in silence. What kept Frantz steady was his belief in order. Not harsh order, but thoughtful structure. He believed chaos harmed everyone, especially the most vulnerable. Even when the system was imperfect, he felt that acting with discipline prevented greater harm. This belief allowed him to continue without losing himself. As time moved forward, Frantz Schmidt stood at a crossroads within his own heart. He was loyal to his role, yet aware of its cost. He was respected for his discipline, yet denied full acceptance. He was surrounded by people, yet deeply alone. This balance defined him. Part 3 of his life was not about action, but about understanding. It was the period when experience turned into wisdom and duty met conscience. Frantz did not rebel, nor did he retreat. Instead, he continued forward with quiet strength, determined to act with fairness in a world shaped by fear and judgment. Unknowingly, these years of reflection and careful record-keeping were shaping how history would remember him. What others saw as routine, he preserved as truth. And in doing so, Frantz Schmidt ensured that his story would be more than just a role in the system. It would be the story of a man who carried responsibility with thought, restraint, and a deeply human sense of conscience. As Frantz Schmidt moved further into the later years of his life, the distance between him and the rest of society became even more clear. He had served the town faithfully for decades, yet the invisible wall around him never truly disappeared. People recognized his role, relied on his presence, and spoke of his accuracy, but they rarely spoke to him as an equal. This quiet rejection followed him everywhere, shaping how he lived, how he planned, and how he thought about the future. By this time, Frantz was no longer driven only by duty. A deeper concern had taken root in his heart. It was no longer just about completing each task correctly. It was about what would remain after he was gone. He worried constantly about his family, especially his children. He knew too well how a family name could shape a life before it even began. He did not want his children to grow up carrying the same burden of silence and separation that had followed him since childhood. This concern slowly became his strongest motivation. Frantz began to think carefully about how he might change their future, even if he could not change his past. He understood that tradition was powerful, but he also believed that honest service should matter. If a person served the law faithfully, without cruelty or misuse of authority, then that service should be recognized as honorable. This belief gave him a quiet but firm resolve. Frantz continued to live with restraint. His daily life remained simple. He avoided public attention and focused on his responsibilities at home. He spent long hours reading and writing, carefully maintaining the records he had kept for most of his life. These writings now felt more important than ever. They were proof of his discipline, his consistency, and his respect for the law. In his mind, they were evidence that his role had been carried out with care, not arrogance. The town itself was changing. New leaders came into power and old customs were slowly questioned. Frantz observed these changes with interest and caution. He did not rush to speak or demand anything. Instead, he waited, believing that patience had served him well before. He knew that timing mattered just as much as intention. As he aged, physical strength became harder to maintain. Frantz was honest with himself about this. He adjusted his routines, planned more carefully, and relied on experience rather than speed. His focus was sharper than ever. Each action was deliberate, guided by years of practice and reflection. He believed that care was a form of respect, not only for the law but for himself. Those who worked with him noticed his steadiness. Younger officials and assistants saw him not as a figure of fear, but as a model of control and seriousness. Some even began to speak of him with quiet admiration. This did not erase the social distance, but it softened it slightly. For Frantz, even small changes mattered. At home, conversations about the future became more frequent. Frantz spoke gently with his family, encouraging education and discipline. He taught his children to read and write, just as his father had taught him. He wanted them to have options, knowledge, and confidence. He believed learning was a door that could lead away from inherited limitations. The idea of formally clearing his family's name slowly took shape. Frantz knew this would not be easy. Few people in his position had ever been publicly recognized in a positive way. Still, he believed his long record of service gave him a reason to hope. He began gathering support quietly, speaking with officials who respected his work. He did not demand praise. He simply asked that his service be seen as lawful and honorable. This process required courage of a different kind. Frantz had spent his life following rules, not challenging them. Now he had to speak for himself and his family. This was uncomfortable, but he understood that silence would change nothing. He approached the matter carefully, with respect and patience, trusting that truth would carry weight. While waiting for a response, Frantz continued his duties with the same seriousness as always. He did not allow hope to distract him from responsibility. In fact, his focus deepened. He wanted his final years of service to reflect the same integrity as his first. He believed consistency was his strongest argument. Emotionally, this period was filled with quiet tension. Frantz felt both determination and uncertainty. He had learned long ago not to expect kindness easily. Still, he allowed himself a small sense of possibility. For the first time, the future did not feel completely closed. The town's reaction was cautious but thoughtful. Some officials recognized the fairness of his request. They saw his long service, his careful records, and his reputation for restraint. Discussions took time, as all important matters did. Frantz waited without complaint, trusting the process he had served for so long. During this waiting period, Frantz reflected deeply on his life. He thought about his father, about the lessons passed down to him, and about the long chain of tradition that had shaped his path. He did not feel anger toward his past. Instead, he felt a desire to bring meaning to it. If his life could open a door for his children, then every year of isolation would have purpose. Faith remained his anchor. Frantz continued to pray, not for reward, but for fairness and understanding. He believed that true justice included mercy and recognition of honest effort. This belief gave him calm, even when answers came slowly. As word spread about his request, public opinion began to shift slightly. Some people started to speak differently about him. They still kept their distance, but their tone changed. Fear gave way to respect, and respect slowly opened the door to understanding. These changes were subtle, but France noticed them. Eventually, signs of progress appeared. Officials acknowledged his service and the care with which he had carried out his role. Discussions turned toward the future of his family rather than his past. For France, this was the greatest relief he could imagine. It meant that his life's work might finally protect those he loved. Part 4 of Frantz Schmidt's life was about hope earned through patience. It was about standing quietly but firmly for fairness. It was not a dramatic struggle, but a steady one, shaped by years of discipline and self-control. France did not seek to change history, he sought to correct one small part of it. As he continued forward, older now but still focused, France carried a sense of calm he had not known before. Whatever the final outcome, he knew he had acted with honesty. He had lived according to his values, even when the world offered little reward. And for the first time, he felt that his long service might finally lead to something greater than duty alone, a chance for dignity, understanding, and a future free from inherited judgment. As Frantz Schmidt entered the final stage of his life, time began to slow in a way he had never felt before. His days were quieter now, shaped more by reflection than routine. The role that had defined him for so many years no longer stood at the center of his identity. Instead, his thoughts turned toward meaning, memory, and what would remain when his own voice was gone. The long process he had begun to clear his family's name finally reached its turning point. Authorities reviewed his lifetime of service, his careful records, and the reputation he had built through discipline and restraint. These were not loud achievements but steady ones, proven over decades. Slowly, recognition replaced doubt. What France had hoped for quietly, without entitlement, was finally taking shape. When the decision came, it did not arrive with celebration or public display. It was delivered formally, with calm words and official language. Yet its meaning was powerful. His service was acknowledged as lawful and honorable. The shadow that had followed his family for generations was lifted. His children would not be forced to live on the edges of society because of his profession. For France, this moment brought a sense of peace deeper than any reward. He did not react with pride. Instead, he felt relief. The weight he had carried since childhood loosened. He thought of his father and wondered what he might have felt if such recognition had been possible earlier. France believed that change, even when slow, mattered. One life, lived with care, could shift the path for those who came after. In the years that followed, France stepped back from public duties. Age had taught him to listen to his body and respect its limits. He spent more time at home, surrounded by quiet routines that brought comfort rather than pressure. Reading, writing, and conversation filled his days. These simple activities felt rich after a life spent under constant observation. His diary became more reflective than ever. He no longer focused only on events, but on thoughts and memories. He wrote about lessons learned, about patience, and about the cost of silence. He did not write to justify himself. He wrote to explain, hoping that someone someday might understand the human side of a life shaped by duty. France also spent time guiding his children, encouraging them to choose their own paths. Education remained his greatest gift to them. He wanted them to think freely, to question carefully, and to live without fear of inherited judgment. Watching them step into society with confidence filled him with quiet joy. The town's attitude toward France softened noticeably. While full acceptance never truly arrived, respect became more open. People greeted him with courtesy. Some even spoke to him about his writings and his long service. These moments, though small, felt meaningful. They showed that understanding could grow even after many years. France did not seek to rewrite how the past remembered him. He accepted that his life would always be seen through the lens of his profession. What mattered more was that the record existed, clear, honest, and complete. His writings ensured that future generations would see not just the role he filled, but the person he was. As his strength faded, Frantz turned more deeply toward faith, not with fear, but with calm acceptance. He believed that intention mattered as much as action. He trusted that a life lived with restraint, fairness, and care would be understood beyond human judgment. This belief gave him comfort in moments of uncertainty. Near the end, Frantz reflected on the strange balance of his life. He had been central to the system, yet never fully part of society. He had held authority, yet lived humbly. He had followed rules strictly, yet questioned them quietly. This balance, he realized, was his true legacy. It showed that even within rigid systems, humanity could survive. When Frantz Schmidt passed away in the early 1600s, his death did not cause public reaction. There were no crowds, no speeches, no grand markers. Yet his influence did not fade. His diary remained, preserved as a rare and honest account of a difficult role carried out with discipline and thoughtfulness. Over time, historians and readers would discover his writings. They would see a man who did not glorify his work, nor hide from its weight. They would find a voice that spoke plainly, without drama, yet filled with meaning. Through his words, Frantz became more than a name in records. He became a witness to his time. What made his story lasting was not the role he held, but how he carried it. He did not allow bitterness to define him. He did not seek attention or power. He chose consistency over emotion, reflection over reaction. In doing so, he left behind something rare, a sense of balance in a world shaped by extremes. Frantz Schmidt's life reminds us that history is not only made by leaders or heroes, but by ordinary people placed in difficult positions. His story shows how duty can shape a life, but not erase its humanity. It shows how patience can open doors that force cannot. In the end, Frantz achieved what he had quietly hoped for all along. He protected his family's future, preserved his truth, and lived according to his conscience. He did not change the world, but he changed how one small part of it would remember him. His life closed without regret, not because it was easy, but because it was honest. And through his careful words and steady actions, Frantz Schmidt ensured that his voice would continue to speak, long after his time had passed, reminding the world that even in the most difficult roles, dignity and thoughtfulness can endure.